Book 2 in Court and Camp. Chapter 1 Joan says goodbye. The 5th of January, 1429. Joan came to me with her uncle Laxart and said, "The time has come. My voices are not vague now, but clear, and they have told me what to do. In 2 months I shall be with the Dauphin." Her spirits were high, and her bearing martial. I caught the infection and felt a great impulse stirring in me that was like what one feels when he hears the roll of the drums and the tramp of marching men. "I believe it," I said. "I also believe it," said Laxart. If she had told me before that she was commanded of God to rescue France, I should not have believed. I should have let her seek the governor by her own ways and held myself clear of meddling in the matter, not doubting she was mad. But I have seen her stand before those nobles and mighty men unafraid, and say a say, and she had not been able to do that but by the help of God. That I know. Therefore with all humbleness I am at her command, to do with me as she will. "My uncle is very good to me," Joan said. "I sent and asked him to come and persuade my mother to let him take me home with him to tend his wife, who is not well. It is arranged, and we go at dawn tomorrow. From his house I shall go soon to Vaucouleurs, and wait and strive until my prayer is granted. Who were the 2 cavaliers who sat to your left at the governor's table that day? One was the Sieur Jean de Novelonpont de Metz, the other the Sieur Bertrand de Poulengy. Good metal, both. I marked them for men of mine. What is it I see in your face? Doubt? I was teaching myself to speak the truth to her, not trimming it or polishing it. So I said, "They considered you out of your head, and said so. It is true they pitied you for being in such misfortune, but still they held you to be mad." This did not seem to trouble her in any way or wound her. She only said, "The wise change their mind when they perceive that they have been in error. They will march with me. I shall see them presently." "You seem to doubt again? Do you doubt?" "And no, not now. I was remembering that it was a year ago, and that they did not belong here, but only chanced to stop a day on their journey. They will come again. But as the matter's now in hand, I came to leave with you some instructions. You will follow me in a few days. Order your affairs, for you will be absent long." "Will Jean and Pierre go with me?" "No, they would refuse now, but presently they will come, and with them they will bring my parents' blessing, and likewise their consent that I take up my mission. I shall be stronger for that. For lack of it I am weak now." She paused a little while, and the tears gathered in her eyes. Then she went on. "I would say goodbye to little Menjet. Bring her outside the village at dawn. She must go with me a little of the way. And Hamet." She broke down and began to cry, saying, "No, oh, no. She is too dear to me. I could not bear it, knowing I should never look upon her face again." Next morning I brought Menjet, and we for a walk along the road in the cold dawn till the village was far behind. Then the 2 girls said their goodbyes, clinging about each other's neck and pouring out their grief in loving words and tears, a pitiful sight to see. And Joan took one long look back upon the distant village, and the fairy tree, and the oak forest, and the flowery plain, and the river, as if she was trying to print these scenes on a memory so that they would abide there always and not fade, for she knew she would not see them any more in this life. Then she turned and went from us, sobbing bitterly. It was a birthday and mine. She was 17 years old. Chapter 2 The Governor speeds Joan. After a few days, Laxart took Joan to Vaucouleurs, and found lodging and guardianship for her with Catherine Royer, a wheelwright's wife, an honest and good woman. Joan went to Mass regularly. She helped do the housework, earning her keep in that way, and if any wished to talk with her about her mission, and many did, she talked freely, making no concealments regarding the matter now. I was soon housed nearby, and witnessed the effects which followed. At once the tidings spread that a young girl was come who was appointed of God to save France. The common people flocked in crowds to look at her and speak with her, and her fair young loveliness won the half of their belief, and her deep earnestness and transparent sincerity won the other half. The well-to-do remained away and scoffed, but that is their way. Next, a prophecy of Merlin's, more than 800 years old, was called to mind, which said that in a far future time France would be lost by a woman and restored by a woman. France was now, for the first time, lost and by a woman, Isabel of Bavaria, her base queen. Doubtless this fair and pure young girl was commissioned of heaven to complete the prophecy. This gave the growing interest a new and powerful impulse. The excitement rose higher and higher, and hope and faith along with it. And so from Vaucouleurs wave after wave of this inspiring enthusiasm flowed out over the land, far and wide, invading all the villages and refreshing and revivifying the perishing children of France. And from these villages came people who wanted to see for themselves, hear for themselves. And they did see and hear and believe. They filled the town. They more than filled it. Inns and lodgings were packed, and yet half of the inflow had to go without shelter. And still they came, winter as it was. For when a man's soul is starving, what does he care for meat and roof? So he can beget that nobler hunger fed. Day after day, and still day after day the great tide rose. Domrémy was dazed, amazed, stupefied, and said to itself, was this world wonder now familiar amidst all these years, and we too dull to see it? Jane and Pierre went out from the village, stared at and envied like the great and fortunate of the earth, and their progress to Vaucouleurs was like a triumph, all the countryside flocking to see and salute the brothers of one with whom angels had spoken face to face, and into whose hands by command of God they had delivered the destinies of France. The brothers brought the parents' blessing and Godspeed to Joan, and their promise to bring it to her in person later. And so, with this culminating happiness in her heart and the high hope it inspired, she went and confronted the governor again. But he was no more tractable than he had been before. He refused to send her to the king. She was disappointed, but in no degree discouraged. She said, I must still come to you until I get the men-at-arms, for so it is commanded, and I may not disobey. I must go to the Dauphin, though I go on my knees. I and the two brothers were with Joan daily, to see the people that came and hear what they said. And one day, sure enough, the Sieur Jean de Metz came. He talked with her in a petting and playful way, as one talks with children, and said, What are you doing here, my little maid? Will they drive the king out of France, and shall we all turn English? She answered him in her tranquil, serious way. I am come to bid Robert de Baudricourt take, or send me to the king, but he does not heed my words. Ay, you have an admirable persistence. Truly, a whole year has not turned you from your wish. I saw you when you came before. Joan said, as tranquilly as before, It is not a wish, it is a purpose. He will grant it. I can wait. Ah, perhaps it will not be wise to make too sure of that, my child. These governors are stubborn people to deal with. In case he shall not grant your prayer. He will grant it. He must. It is not a matter of choice. The gentleman's playful mood began to disappear. One could see that by his face. Joan's earnestness was affecting him. It always happened that people who began in jest with her ended by being in earnest. They soon began to perceive depths in her that they had not suspected. And then her manifest sincerity and the rock-like steadfastness of her convictions were forces which cowed levity, and it could not maintain its self-respect in their presence. The Sieur de Metz was thoughtful for a moment or two. Then he began, quite soberly, Is it necessary that you go to the king soon? That is, I mean, before mid-Lent, even though I wear away my legs to the knees. She said it with that sort of repressed fieriness that means so much when a person's heart is in a thing. You could see the response in that nobleman's face. You could see his eye light up. There was sympathy there. He said, most earnestly, God knows I think you should have the men-at-arms, and that somewhat would come of it. What is it that you would do? What is your hope and purpose? To rescue France. And it is appointed that I shall do it. For no one else in the world, neither kings, nor dukes, nor any other, can recover the kingdom of France, and there is no help but in me. The words had a pleading and pathetic sound, and they touched that good nobleman. I saw it plainly. Joan dropped her voice a little, and said, But indeed I would rather spin with my poor mother, for this is not my calling, but I must go and do it, for it is my Lord's will. Who is your Lord? He is God. Then the Sieur de Metz, following the impressive old feudal fashion, knelt and laid his hands within Joan's in sign of fealty, and made oath that by God's help he himself would take her to the king. The next day came the Sieur Bertrand de Poulengy, and he also pledged his oath and knightly honor to abide with her and follow her whithersoever she might lead. This day, too, toward evening, a great rumor went flying abroad through the town, namely, that the very governor himself was going to visit the young girl in her humble lodgings. So in the morning the streets and lanes were packed with people waiting to see if the strange thing would indeed happen. And happen it did. The governor rode in state, attended by his guards, and the news of it went everywhere, and made a great sensation, and mortified the scoffings of the people of quality, and raised Joan's credit higher than ever. The governor had made up his mind to one thing. Joan was either a witch or saint, and he meant to find out which it was. So he brought a priest with him to exorcise the devil that was in her in case there was one there. The priest performed his office, but found no devil. He merely hurt Joan's feelings and offended her piety without need, for he had already confessed her before this, and should have known, if he knew anything, that devils cannot abide a confessional, but utter cries of anguish and the most profane and furious cursings whenever they are confronted with that holy office. The governor went away troubled and full of thought, and not knowing what to do. And while he pondered and studied, several days went by, and the 14th of February was come. Then Joan went to the castle and said, "In God's name, Robert de Baudricourt, you are too slow about sending me, and have caused damage thereby. For this day the Dauphin's cause has lost a battle near Orleans, and will suffer yet greater injury if you do not send me to him soon." The governor was perplexed by this speech, and said, "Today, child, today? How can you know what has happened in that region today? It would take 8 or 10 days for the word to come. My voices have brought the word to me, and it is true. A battle was lost today, and you are in fault to delay me so." The governor walked the floor a while, talking within himself, but letting a great oath fall outside now and then, and finally he said, "Harkee, go in peace, and wait. If it shall turn out as you say, I will give you the letter and send you to the king, and not otherwise." Joan said with fervor, "Now God be thanked. These waiting days are almost done. In 9 days you will fetch me the letter." Already the people of Vaucouleurs had given her a horse and had armed and equipped her as a soldier. She got no chance to try the horse and see if she could ride it, for her great first duty was to abide at a post and lift up the hopes and spirits of all who would come to talk with her, and prepare them to help in the rescue and regeneration of the kingdom. This occupied every waking moment she had. But it was no matter. There was nothing she could not learn, and in the briefest time, too. Her horse would find this out in the first hour. Meantime, the brothers and I took the horse in turn and began to learn to ride. And we had teaching in the use of the sword and other arms also. On the 20th, Joan called her small army together, the 2 knights and her 2 brothers and me, for a private council of war. No, it was not a council, that is not the right name, for she did not consult with us. She merely gave us orders. She mapped out the course she would travel toward the king, and did it like a person perfectly versed in geography, and this itinerary of daily marches was so arranged as to avoid here and there peculiarly dangerous regions by flank movements, which showed that she knew her political geography as intimately as she knew her physical geography, yet she had never had a day's schooling, of course, and was without education. I was astonished, but thought her voices must have taught her. But upon reflection, I saw that this was not so. By her references to what this and that and the other person had told her, I perceived that she had been diligently questioning those crowds of visiting strangers, and that out of them she had patiently dug all this mess of invaluable knowledge. The 2 knights were filled with wonder at her good sense and sagacity. She commanded us to make preparations to travel by night and sleep by day in concealment, as almost the whole of our long journey would be through the enemy's country. Also, she commanded that we should keep the date of our departure secret, since she meant to get away unobserved. Otherwise, we should be sent off with a grand demonstration which would advertise us to the enemy, and we should be ambushed and captured somewhere. Finally, she said, "Nothing remains, now, but that I confide to you the date of our departure, so that you may make all needful preparation in time, leaving nothing to be done in haste and badly at the last moment. We marched the 23d at 11 of the clock at night. Then we were dismissed. The 2 knights were startled, yes, and troubled, and the Sieur Bertrand said, Even if the governor shall really furnish the letter and the escort, he still may not do it in time to meet the date she has chosen. Then how can she venture to name that date? It is a great risk to select and decide upon the date in the state of uncertainty. I said, since she has named the 23D, we may trust her. The voices have told her, I think, we shall do best to obey. We did obey. Joan's parents were notified to come before the 23D, but prudence forbade that they be told why this limit was named. All day, the 23D. She glanced up wistfully whenever new bodies of strangers entered the house, but her parents did not appear. Still she was not discouraged, but hoped on. But when night fell at last, her hopes perished, and the tears came. However, she dashed them away, and said, it was to be so, no doubt it was so ordered. I must bear it, and will. The Mets tried to comfort her by saying, the governor sends no word. It may be that they will come tomorrow, and... He got no further, for she interrupted him, saying, to what good end? We start at 11 tonight. And it was so. At 10 the governor came, with his guard and arms, with horses and equipment for me and for the brothers, and gave Joan a letter to the king. Then he took off his sword and belted it about her waist with his own hands, and said, you said true, child, the battle was lost on the day you said. So I have kept my word. Now go, come of it what may. Joan gave him thanks, and he went his way. The lost battle was a famous disaster that is called in history the Battle of the Herrings. All the lights in the house were at once put out, and a little while after, when the streets had become dark and still, we crept stealthily through them and out at the western gate and rode away under whip and spur. Chapter 3. The Paladin Groans and Boasts. We were 25 strong and well equipped. We rode in double file, Joan and her brothers in the center of the column, with Jean de Metz at the head of it and the Sieur Bertrand at its extreme rear. In 2 or 3 hours we should be in the enemy's country, and then none would venture to desert. By and by we began to hear groans and sobs and execration from different points along the line, and upon inquiry found that 6 of our men were peasants who had never ridden a horse before, and were finding it very difficult to stay in their saddles, and moreover were now beginning to suffer considerable bodily torture. They had been seized by the governor at the last moment and pressed into the service to make up the tale, and he had placed a veteran alongside of each with orders to help him stick to the saddle, and kill him if he tried to desert. These poor devils had kept quiet as long as they could, but their physical miseries were become so sharp by this time that they were obliged to give them vent. But we were within the enemy's country now, so there was no help for them. They must continue to march, though Joan said that if they chose to take the risk they might depart. They preferred to stay with us. We modified our pace now, and moved cautiously, and the new men were warned to keep their sorrows to themselves and not get the command into danger with their curses and lamentations. Toward dawn we rode deep into a forest, and soon over the sentries were sound asleep in spite of the cold ground and the frosty air. I woke at noon out of such a solid and stupefying sleep that at first my wits were all astray, and I did not know where I was nor what had been happening. Then my senses cleared, and I remembered. As I lay there thinking over the strange events of the past month or two, the thought came into my mind, greatly surprising me, that one of Joan's prophecies had failed. For where were Noel and the Paladin, who were to join us at the 11th hour? By this time, you see, I had gotten used to expecting everything Joan said to come true. So, being disturbed and troubled by these thoughts, I opened my eyes. Well, there stood the Paladin leaning against a tree and looking down on me. How often that happens! You think of a person, or speak of a person, and there he stands before you, and you not dreaming he is near. It looks as if his being near is really the thing that makes you think of him, and not just an accident, as people imagine. Well, be that as it may, there was a Paladin, anyway, looking down at my face and waiting for me to wake. I was ever so glad to see him, and jumped up and shook him by the hand, and led him a little way from the camp, he limping like a cripple, and told him to sit down, and said, "Now, where have you dropped down from? And how did you happen to light in this place? And what do the soldier clothes mean? Tell me all about it." He answered, "I marched with you last night." "No." To myself I said, the prophecy has not all failed. Half of it has come true. Yes, I did. I hurried up from Domrémy to join, and was within a half a minute of being too late. In fact, I was too late, but I begged so hard that the governor was touched by my brave devotion to my country's cause. Those are the words he used, and so he yielded and allowed me to come. I thought to myself, this is a lie. He is one of those 6 the governor recruited by force at the last moment. I know it. For Joan's prophecy said he would join at the 11th hour, but not by his own desire. Then I said aloud, I am glad you came. It is a noble cause, and one should not sit at home in times like these. Sit at home. I could no more do it than the thunderstone could stay hid in the clouds when the storm calls it. That is the right talk. It sounds like you. That please him. I'm glad you know me. Some don't, but they will, presently. They will know me well enough before I get done with this war. That is what I think. I believe that wherever danger confronts you, you will make yourself conspicuous. He was charmed with his speech, and it swelled him up like a bladder. He said, if I know myself, and I think I do, my performances in this campaign will give you occasion more than once to remember those words. I were a fool to doubt it. That I know. I shall not be at my best, being but a common soldier. Still, the country will hear of me. If I were where I belong, if I were in the place of La Haye, or Saint-Trailles, or the Bastard of Orleans, well, I say nothing. I am not of the talking kind. Like Noel Raingesson and his sort, I thank God. But it will be something, I take it, a novelty in this world, I should say, to raise the fame of a private soldier above theirs, and extinguish the glory of their names with its shadow. Why, look here, my friend, I said, do you know that you have hit out a most remarkable idea there? Do you realize the gigantic proportions of it? For look you, to be a general of vast renown, what is that? Nothing. History is clogged and confused with them. One cannot keep their names in his memory. There are so many. But a common soldier of supreme renown, why, he would stand alone. He would be one moon in a firmament of mustard seed stars. His name would outlast the human race. My friend, who gave you that idea? He was ready to burst with happiness, but he suppressed betrayal of it as well as he could. He simply waved the compliment aside with his hand and said, with complacency, it is nothing. I have them often, ideas like that, and even greater ones. I do not consider this one much. You astonish me. You do, indeed. So it is really your own. Quite. And there is plenty more where it came from. Tapping his head with his finger, and taking occasion at the same time to can his moion over his right ear, which gave him a very self-satisfied air. I do not need to borrow my ideas, like Noel Raingesson. Speaking of Noel, when did you see him last? Half an hour ago. He is sleeping yonder like a corpse. Rode with us last night. I felt a great upleap in my heart, and said to myself, now I am at rest and glad. I will never doubt or prophesize again. Then I said aloud, it gives me joy. It makes me proud of our village. There is not keeping our lion hearts at home in these great times. I see that. Lionheart? Who? That baby. Why, he begged like a dog to be let off, cried, and said he wanted to go to his mother. Him a Lionheart, that tumble-bug. Dear me, why I suppose he volunteered, of course. Didn't he? Oh, yes, he volunteered the way people do to the headsman. Why, when he found I was coming up from Domrémy to volunteer, he asked me to let him come along in my protection, and see the crowds and the excitement. Well, we arrived and saw the torches filing out of the castle, and ran there, and the governor had him seized, along with 4 more, and he begged to be let off, and I begged for his place, and at last the governor allowed me to join, but wouldn't let Noel off, because he was disgusted with him. He was such a crybaby. Yes, and much good he'll do the king's service. He'll eat for 6 and run for 16. I hate a pygmy with half a heart and 9 stomachs. Why? This is very surprising news to me, and I am sorry and disappointed to hear it. I thought he was a very manly fellow. The paladin gave me an outraged look, and said, I don't see how you can talk like that. I'm sure I don't. I don't see how you could have got such a notion. I don't dislike him, and I'm not saying these things out of prejudice, for I don't allow myself to have prejudices against people. I like him, and have always comraded with him from the cradle, but he must allow me to speak my mind about his faults, and I am willing he shall speak his about mine, if I have any. And, true enough, maybe I have, but I reckon they'll bear inspection. I have that idea, anyway. A manly fellow. You should have heard him whine and wail and sway, last night, because the settle hurt him. Why didn't the settle hurt me? Pooh! I was as much at home in it as if I had been born there. And yet it was the first time I was ever on a horse. All those old soldiers admired my riding. They said they had never seen anything like it. But him, why, they had to hold him on all the time. An odor as of breakfast came stealing through the wood. The paladin unconsciously inflated his nostrils in lustful response, and got up and limped painfully away, saying he must go and look to his horse. At bottom he was all right and a good-hearted giant, without any harm in him, for it is no harm to bark if one stops there and does not bite, and it is no harm to be an S if one is content to bray and not kick. If this vast structure of brawn and muscle and vanity and foolishness seemed to have a libelous tongue, what of it? There was no malice behind it. And besides, the defect was not his own creation. It was the work of Noel Raingesson, who had nurtured it, fostered it, built it up and perfected it, for the entertainment he got out of it. His careless light heart had to have somebody to nag and chaff and make fun of. The paladin had only needed development in order to meet its requirements. Consequently, the development was taken in hand and diligently attended to and looked after, net in bull fashion, for years, to the neglect and damage of far more important concerns. The result was an unqualified success. Noel prized the society of the paladin above everybody else's. The paladin preferred any bodies to Noel's. The big fellow was often seen with the little fellow, but it was for the same reason that the bull is often seen with the gnat. With the first opportunity, I had a talk with Noel. I welcomed him to our expedition and said, "It was fine and brave of you to volunteer, Noel." His eye twinkled, and he answered, "Yes, it was rather fine, I think. Still, the credit doesn't all belong to me. I had help." "Who helped you?" "The governor." "How?" "Well, I'll tell you the whole thing. I came up from Domrémy to see the crowds and the general show, for I had never had any experience of such things, of course, and this was a great opportunity. But I hadn't any mind to volunteer. I overtook the paladin on the road and let him have my company the rest of the way, although he did not want it and said so, and while we were gawking and blinking in the glare of the governor's torches, they seized us in full more and added us to the escort, and that is really how I came to volunteer. But, after all, I wasn't sorry, remembering how dull life would have been in the village without the paladin. How did he feel about it? Was he satisfied? I think he was glad. Why? Because he said he wasn't. He was taken by surprise, you see, and it is not likely that he could tell the truth without preparation. Not that he would have prepared if he had had the chance, for I do not think he would. I am not charging him with that. In the same space of time that he could prepare to speak the truth, he could also prepare to lie. Besides, his judgment would be cool then, and would warn him against fooling with new methods in an emergency. No, I am sure he was glad, because he said he wasn't. Do you think he was very glad? Yes, I know he was. He begged like a slave, and bawled for his mother. He said his health was delicate, and he didn't know how to ride a horse, and he knew he couldn't outlive the first march. But really he wasn't looking as delicate as he was feeling. There was a cask of wine there, a proper lift for 4 men. The governor's temper got afire, and he delivered an oath at him that knocked up the dust where it struck the ground, and told him to shoulder that cask or he would carve him to cutlets and send him home in a basket. The paladin did it, and that secured his promotion to a privacy in the escort without any further debate. Yes, you seem to make it quite plain that he was glad to join. That is, if your premises are right that you start from. How did he stand the march last night? About as I did. If he made the more noise, it was a privilege of his bulk. We stayed in our saddles because we had help. We are equally lame today, and if he likes to sit down, let him. I prefer to stand. Chapter 4, Joan leads us through the enemy. We were called to quarters and subjected to a searching inspection by Joan. Then she made a short little talk in which she said that even the rude business of war could be conducted better without profanity and other brutalities of speech than with them, and that she should strictly require us to remember and apply this admonition. She ordered half an hour's horsemanship drill for the novices then, and appointed one of the veterans to conduct it. It was a ridiculous exhibition, but we learned something, and Joan was satisfied and complimented us. She did not take any instruction herself or go through the evolutions and maneuvers, but merely sat her horse like a martial little statue and looked on. That was sufficient for her, you see. She would not miss or forget a detail of the lesson. She would take it all in with her eye and her mind, and apply it afterward with as much certainty and confidence as if she had already practiced it. We now made 3 night marches of 12 or 13 leagues each, riding in peace and undisturbed, being taken for a roving band of free companions. Country folk were glad to have that sort of people go by without stopping. Still, there were very wearying marches, and not comfortable, for the bridges were few and the streams many, and as we had to ford them we found the water dismally cold, and afterward had to bed ourselves, still wet, on the frosty or snowy ground, and get warm as we might and sleep if we could, for it would not have been prudent to build fires. Our energies languished under these hardships and deadly fatigues, but Joan's did not. Her step kept its spring and firmness, and her eye its fire. We could only wonder at this. We could not explain it. But if we had had hard times before, I know not what to call the 5 nights that now followed, for the marches were as fatiguing, the baths as cold, and we were ambuscaded 7 times in addition, and lost 2 novices and 3 veterans in the resulting fights. The news had leaked out and gone abroad that the inspired Virgin of Vaucouleurs was making for the king with an escort, and all the roads were being watched now. These 5 nights disheartened the command a good deal. This was aggravated by a discovery which Noel made, and which he promptly made known at headquarters. Some of the men had been trying to understand why Joan continued to be alert, vigorous, and confident, while the strongest men in the company were fagged with the heavy marches and exposure, and would become morose and irritable. It shows you how men can have eyes and yet not see. All their lives those men had seen their own women folks hitch up with a cow and dragging the plow in the fields while the men did the driving. They had also seen other evidences that women have far more endurance and patience and fortitude than men. But what good had their seeing these things been to them? None. It had taught them nothing. They were still surprised to see a girl of 17 bear the fatigues of war better than trained veterans of the army. Moreover, they did not reflect that a great soul with a great purpose can make a weak body strong and keep it so. And here was the greatest soul in the universe. But how could they know that, those dumb creatures? No, they knew nothing, and their reasonings were of a piece with their ignorance. They argued and discussed among themselves, with Noel listening, and arrived at the decision that Joan was a witch and had a strange pluck and strength from Satan. So they made a plan to watch for a safe opportunity to take her life. To have secret plottings of this sort going on in our midst was a very serious business, of course, and the knights asked Joan's permission to hang the plotters, but she refused without hesitancy. She said, "Neither these men nor any others can take my life before my mission is accomplished. Therefore why should I have their blood upon my hands? I will inform them of this, and also admonish them. Call them before me." When they came, she made that statement to them in a plain, matter-of-fact way, and just as if the thought never entered her mind that anyone could doubt it after she had given her word that it was true. The men were evidently amazed and impressed to hear her say such a thing in such a sure and confident way, for prophecies boldly uttered never fall barren on superstitious ears. Yes, this speech certainly impressed them, but her closing remark impressed them still more. It was for the ringleader, and Joan said it sorrowfully. "It is a pity that you should plot another's death when your own is so close at hand. That man's horse stumbled and fell on him in the first ford which we crossed that night, and he was drowned before we could help him. We had no more conspiracies. This night was harassed with ambuscades, but we got through without having any men killed. One more night would carry us over the hostile frontier if we had good luck, and we saw the night close down with a good deal of solicitude. Always before, We had been more or less reluctant to start out into the gloom and the silence to be frozen in the fords and persecuted by the enemy, but this time we were impatient to get underway and have it over, although there was promise of more and harder fighting than any of the previous nights had furnished. Moreover, in front of us about 3 leagues there was a deep stream with a frail wooden bridge over it, and as a cold rain mixed with snow had been falling steadily all day, we were anxious to find out whether we were in a trap or not. If the swollen stream had washed away the bridge, we might properly consider ourselves trapped and cut off from escape. As soon as it was dark, we filed out from the depth of the forest where we had been hidden and began the march. From the time that we had begun to encounter ambushes, Joan had ridden at the head of the column, and she took this post now. By the time we had gone a league, the rain and snow had turned to sleet, and under the impulse of the storm wind it lashed my face like whips, and I envied Joan and the knights, who could close their visors and shut up their heads and their helmets as in a box. Now, out of the pitchy darkness and close at hand, came the sharp command, "Halt!" We obeyed. I made out a dim mess in front of us which might be a body of horsemen, but one could not be sure. A man rode up and said to Joan in a tone of reproof, "Well, you have taken your time, truly. And what have you found out? Is she still behind us, or in front?" Joan answered in a level voice, "She is still behind." This news softened the stranger's tone. He said, "If you know that to be true, you have not lost your time, Captain. But are you sure? How do you know?" "Because I have seen her." "Seen her? Seen the Virgin herself?" "Yes, I have been in a camp." "Is it possible?" "Captain Raymond, I ask you to pardon me for speaking in that tone just now. You have performed a daring and admirable service." "Where was she camped?" "In the forest, not more than a league from here." "Good. I was afraid we might be still behind her, but now that we know she is behind us, everything is safe. She is our game. We will hang her. You shall hang her yourself. No one has so well earned the privilege of abolishing this pestilent limb of Satan." "I do not know how to thank you sufficiently. If we catch her, I will take care of that. Give yourself no uneasiness. All I want is just a look at her, to see what the imp is like that has been able to make all this noise. Then you and the halter may have her. How many men has she?" "I counted but 18, but she may have had 2 or 3 pickets out." "Is that all? It won't be a mouthful for my force. Is it true that she is only a girl?" "Yes, she is not more than 17. "It passes belief. Is she robust or slender?" "Slender." The officer pondered a moment or two. Then he said, "Was she preparing to break camp?" "Not when I had my last glimpse of her." "What was she doing?" "She was talking quietly with an officer." "Quietly? Not giving orders?" "No, talking as quietly as we are now." "That is good. She is feeling a false security. She would have been restless and fussy else. It is the way of her sex when danger is about." As she was making no preparation to break camp. She certainly was not when I saw her last, and was chatting quietly and at her ease. It means that this weather is not to her taste. Night marching in sleet and wind is not for chits of 17. No, she will stay where she is. She has my thanks. We will camp ourselves. Here is as good a place as any. Let us get about it. If you command it, certainly. But she has 2 knights with her. They might force her to march, particularly if the weather should improve. I was scared and impatient to be getting out of this peril, and it distressed and worried me to have Joan apparently set herself to work to make delay and increase the danger. Still, I thought she probably knew better than I what to do. The officer said, "Well, in that case we are here to block the way." "Yes, if they come this way. But if they should send out spies and find out enough to make them want to try for the bridge through the woods, is it best to allow the bridge to stand?" It made me shiver to hear her. The officer considered a while, then said, "It might be well enough to send a force to destroy the bridge. I was intending to occupy it with the whole command, but that is not necessary now." Joan said, tranquilly, "With your permission, I will go and destroy it myself." "Ah, Now I saw her idea, and was glad she had had the cleverness to invent it and the ability to keep her head cool and think of it in that tight place. The officer replied, "You have it, Captain, and my thanks. With you to do it, it will be well done. I could send another in your place, but not a better." They saluted, and we moved forward. I breathed freer. A dozen times I had imagined I heard the hoofbeats of the real Captain Raymond's troop arriving behind us, and had been sitting on pins and needles all the while that conversation was dragging along. I breathed freer, but was still not comfortable, for Joan had given only the simple command, "Forward." Consequently, we moved in a dead walk past a dim and lengthening column of enemies at our side. The suspense was exhausting, yet it lasted but a short while, for when the enemy's bugles sang the dismount, Joan gave the word to trot, and that was a great relief to me. She was always at herself, you see, before the command to dismount had been given. Somebody might have wanted the countersign somewhere along that line if we came flying by at speed, but now we seemed to be on our way to our allotted camping position, so we were allowed to pass unchallenged. The further we went, the more formidable was the strength revealed by the hostile force. Perhaps it was only 100 or 2, but to me it seemed 1,000. When we passed the last of these people, I was thankful, and the deeper we plowed into the darkness beyond them, the better I felt. I came nearer and nearer to feeling good. For an hour, then we found the bridge still standing, and I felt entirely good. We crossed it and destroyed it, and then I felt, but I cannot describe what I felt. One has to feel it himself in order to know what it is like. We had expected to hear the rush of a pursuing force behind us, for we thought that the real Captain Raymond would arrive and suggest that perhaps the troop that had been mistaken for his belonged to the Virgin of Vaucouleurs. But he must have been delayed seriously, for when we resumed our march beyond the river there were no sounds behind us except those which the storm was furnishing. I said that Joan had harvested a good many compliments intended for Captain Raymond, and that he would find nothing of a crop left but a dry stubble of reprimands when he got back, and a commander just in the humor to superintend the gathering of it in. Joan said, "It will be as you say, no doubt, for the commander took a troop for granted, in the night and unchallenged, and would have camped without sending a force to destroy the bridge if he had been left unadvised, and none are so ready to find fault with others as those who do things worthy of blame themselves." The Sieur Bertrand was amused at Joan's naive way of referring to her advice as if it had been a valuable present to a hostile leader who was saved by from making a censurable blunder of omission, and then he went on to admire how ingeniously she had deceived that man and yet had not told him anything that was not the truth. This troubled Joan, and she said, "I thought he was deceiving himself. I forbore to tell him lies, for that would have been wrong. But if my truths deceived him, perhaps that made them lies, and I am to blame. I would God I knew if I have done wrong." She was assured that she had done right, and that in the perils and necessities of war, deceptions that help one's own cause and hurt the enemies were always permissible. But she was not quite satisfied with that, and thought that even when a great cause was in danger, one ought to have the privilege of trying honorable ways first. Jean said, "Joan, you told us yourself that you were going to Uncle Laxart's and nurse's wife, but you didn't say you were going further. Yet you did go on to Vaucouleurs." "There! I see now," said Joan, sorrowfully. "I told no lie, yet I deceived. I had tried all other ways first, but I could not get away, and I had to get away. My mission required it. I did wrong, I think, and am to blame." She was silent a moment, turning the matter over in her mind. Then she added, with quiet decision, "But the thing itself was right, and I would do it again." It seemed an overnice distinction, but nobody said anything. If we had known her as well as she knew herself, and as a later history revealed her to us, we should have perceived that she had a clear meaning there, and that her position was not identical with ours, as we were supposing, but occupied a higher plane. She would sacrifice herself, and her best self, that is, her truthfulness, to save her cause, but only that. She would not buy a life at that cost, whereas our war ethics permitted the purchase of our lives, or any mere military advantage, small or great, by deception. Her saying seemed a commonplace at the time, the essence of its meaning escaping us, but one sees now that it contained a principle which lifted it above that and made it great and fine. Presently the wind died down, the sleet stopped falling, and the cold was less severe. The road was become a bog, and the horses labored through it at a walk. They could do no better. As the heavy time wore on, exhaustion overcame us, and we slept in our saddles. Not even the dangers that threatened us could keep us awake. This 10th night seemed longer than any of the others, and of course it was the hardest, because we had been accumulating fatigue from the beginning, and had more of it on hand now than at any previous time. But we were not molested again. When the dull dawn came, at last we saw a river before us, and we knew it was a Loire. We entered the town of Gien, and knew we were in a friendly land, with the hostiles all behind us. That was a glad morning for us. We were a worn and bedraggled and shabby-looking troop, and still, as always, Joan was the freshest of us all, in both body and spirits. We had averaged above 13 leagues a night, by tortuous and wretched roads. It was a remarkable march, and shows what men can do when they have a leader with a determined purpose and a resolution that never flags. Chapter 5, we pierced the last ambuscades. We rested and otherwise refreshed ourselves 2 or 3 hours at Gien, but by that time the news was abroad that the young girl commissioned of God to deliver France was come, wherefore such a press of people flocked to our quarters to get sight of her that it seemed best to seek a quieter place. So we pushed on and halted at a small village called Fibrois. We were now within 6 leagues of the king, who was at the castle of Chinon. Joan dictated a letter to him at once, and I wrote it. In it she said she had come 150 leagues to bring him good news, and begged the privilege of delivering it in person. She added that although she had never seen him, she would know him in any disguise and would point him out. The 2 knights rode away at once with the letter. The troop slept all the afternoon, and after supper we felt pretty fresh and fine, especially our little group of young Domrémians. We had the comfortable tap room of the village into ourselves, and for the first time in 10 unspeakably long days were exempt from bodings and terrors and hardships and fatiguing labors. The paladin was suddenly become his ancient self again, and was swaggering up and down, a very monument of self-complacency. Noel Raingesson said, "I think it is wonderful the way he has brought us through." "Who?" asked Jean. "Why, the paladin." The paladin seemed not to hear. What had he to do with it? Asked Pierre d'Arc. Everything. It was nothing but Joan's confidence in his discretion that enabled her to keep up her heart. She could depend on us and on herself for valor, but discretion is the winning thing in war. After all, discretion is the rarest and loftiest of qualities, and he has got more of it than any other man in France. More of it, perhaps, than any other 60 men in France. "Now you are getting ready to make a fool of yourself, Noel Raingesson," said the paladin, "and you want to coil some of that long tongue of yours around your neck and stick the end of it in your ear, then you'll be the less likely to get into trouble." "I didn't know he had more discretion than other people," said Pierre, "for discretion argues brains, and he hasn't any more brains than the rest of us, in my opinion." "No, you are wrong there. Discretion hasn't anything to do with brains. Brains are an obstruction to it, for it does not reason, it feels. Perfect discretion means absence of brains. Discretion is a quality of the heart, solely a quality of the heart. It acts upon us through feeling. We know this because if it were an intellectual quality, it would only perceive a danger. For instance, where danger exists, whereas. "Hear him twaddle, the damned idiot," muttered the paladin. "Whereas, it being purely a quality of the heart, and proceeding by feeling, not reason, its reach is correspondingly wider and sublimer, enabling it to perceive and avoid dangers that haven't any existence at all, as, for instance, that night in the fog, when the paladin took his horse's ears for hostile lances and got off and climbed a tree. It's a lie without shadow of foundation, and I call upon you all to beware you give credence to the malicious inventions of this ramshackle slander mill that has been doing its best to destroy my character for years, and will grind up your own reputation for you next. I got off to tighten my saddle girth. I wish I may die in my tracks if it isn't so, and whoever wants to believe it can, and whoever don't can let it alone. That is the way with him, you see. He never can discuss a theme temperately, but always flies off the handle and becomes disagreeable. And you notice his defect of memory. He remembers getting off his horse, but forgets all the rest, even the tree. But that is natural. He would remember getting off the horse because he was so used to doing it. He always did it when there was an alarm and the clash of arms at the front. Why did he choose that time for it? Asked Jean. I don't know. To tighten up his girth. He thinks to climb a tree. I think I saw him climb 9 trees in a single night. You saw nothing of the kind. A person that can lie like that deserves no one's respect. I ask you all to answer me. Do you believe what this reptile has said? All seemed embarrassed, and only Pierre replied. He said, hesitatingly, Well, I hardly know what to say. It is a delicate situation. It seems offensive to me to refuse to believe a person when he makes so direct a statement, and yet I am obliged to say, rude as it may appear, that I am not able to believe the whole of it. No, I am not able to believe that you climbed 9 trees. They, cried the paladin. Now what do you think of yourself, Noel Raingesson? How many do you believe I climbed? Pierre. Only 8. The laughter that followed inflamed the paladin's anger to white heat, and he said, I bide my time. I bide my time. I will reckon with you all. I promise you that. Don't get him started, Noel pleaded. He is a perfect line when he gets started. I saw enough to teach me that after the 3rd skirmish. After it was over, I saw him come out of the bushes and attack a dead man single-handed. It is another lie, and I give you fair warning that you are going too far. You will see me attack a live one if you are not careful. Meaning me, of course. This wounds me more than any number of injurious and unkind speeches could do. In gratitude to one's benefactor. Benefactor? What do I owe you, I should like to know? You owe me your life. I stood between the trees and the foe, and kept hundreds and thousands of the enemy at bay when they were thirsting for your blood. And I did not do it to display my daring. I did it because I loved you and could not live without you. There, you have said enough. I will not stay here to listen to these infamies. I can endure your lies, but not your love. Keep that corruption for somebody with a stronger stomach than mine. And I want to say this, before I go, that you people's small performances might appear the better and win you the more glory. I hid my own deeds through all the march. I went always to the front, where the fighting was thickest, to be remote from you in order that you might not see and be discouraged by the things I did to the enemy. It was my purpose to keep this a secret in my own breast, but you forced me to reveal it. If you ask for my witnesses, yonder they lie, on the road we have come. I found that road mud, I pave it with corpses. I found that country sterile, I fertilize it with blood. Time and again I was urged to go to the rear because the command could not proceed on account of my dead. And yet you miscreant, accuse me of climbing trees. Pow! And he strode out, with a lofty A, for the recital of his imaginary deeds had already set him up again and made him feel good. Next day we mounted and faced toward Chinon. Orleans was at our back now, and close by, lying in the strangling grip of the English. Soon, please God, we would face about and go to their relief. From Gien the news had spread to Orleans that the peasant maid of Vaucouleurs was on her way, divinely commissioned to raise the siege. The news made a great excitement and raised a great hope, the first breath of hope those poor souls had breathed in 5 months. They sent commissioners at once to the king to beg him to consider this matter, and not throw this help lightly away. These commissioners were already at Chinon by this time. When we were halfway to Chinon, we happened upon yet one more squad of enemies. They burst suddenly out of the woods, and in considerable force, too, but we were not the apprentices we were 10 or 12 days before. No, we were seasoned to this kind of adventure now. Our hearts did not jump into our throats, and our weapons tremble in our hands. We had learned to be always in battle array, always alert, and always ready to deal with any emergency that might turn up. We were no more dismayed by the sight of those people than our commander was. Before they could form, Joan had delivered the order, forward, and we were down upon them with a rush. They stood no chance. They turned tail and scattered, we plowing through them as if they had been men of straw. That was our last ambuscade, and it was probably laid for us by that treacherous rascal, the king's own minister and favorite, de la Tremouille. We housed ourselves in an inn, and soon the town came flocking to get a glimpse of the maid. Ah, the tedious king and his tedious people. Our 2 good knights came presently, their patience well wearied, and reported. They and we reverently stood, as becomes persons who are in the presence of kings and the superiors of kings, until Joan, troubled by this mark of homage and respect, and not content with it nor yet used to it, although we had not permitted ourselves to do otherwise since the day she prophesied that wretched traitor's death, and he was straightway drowned, thus confirming many previous signs that she was indeed an ambassador commissioned of God, commanded us to sit. Then the Sieur de Metz said to Joan, "The king has got the letter, but they will not let us have speech with him." "Who is it that forbids?" "None forbids, but there be 3 or 4 that are nearest his person, schemers and traitors everyone, that put obstructions in the way, and seek all ways, by lies and pretexts, to make delay. Chiefest of these are Georges de la Tremouille and that plotting fox, the Archbishop of Rheims, while they keep the king idle and in bondage to his sports and follies. They are great, and their importance grows. Whereas if ever he assert himself and rise and strike for crown and country like a man, their reign is done. So they but thrive. They care not if the crown go to destruction, and the king with it. You have spoken with others besides these. Not of the court. No, the court are the meek slaves of those reptiles, and watch their mouths and their actions, acting as they act, thinking as they think, saying as they say. Wherefore they are cold to us, and turn aside and go another way when we appear. But we have spoken with the commissioners from Orleans. They said with heat, "It is a marvel that any man in such desperate case as is the king can moon around in this torpid way, and see us all go to ruin without lifting a finger to stay the disaster. What a most strange spectacle it is. Here he is, shut up in this wee corner of the realm like a rat in a trap, his royal shelter this huge gloomy tomb of a castle, with wormy rags for upholstery and crippled furniture for use, a very house of desolation. In his treasure 40 francs, and not a farthing more, God be witness. No army, no any shadow of one. And by contrast with his hungry poverty you behold this crownless pauper and his shoals of fools and favorites tricked out in the gaudiest silks and velvets you shall find in any court in Christendom. And look you, he knows that when our city falls, as fall it surely will except succor come swiftly, France falls. He knows that when that day comes he will be an outlaw and a fugitive, and that behind him the English flag will float unchallenged over every acre of his great heritage. He knows these things. He knows that our faithful city is fighting all solitary and alone against disease, starvation, and the sword to stay this awful calamity. Yet he will not strike one blow to save her. He will not hear our prayers. He will not even look upon our faces. That is what the commissioners said, and they are in despair." Joan said, gently, "It is pity, but they must not despair. The Dauphin will hear them presently. Tell them so." She almost always called the king the Dauphin. To her mind he was not king yet, not being crowned. "We will tell them so, and it will content them, for they believe you come from God." The Archbishop and his confederate have for backer that veteran soldier Rold de Gaucourt, Grand Master of the Palace, a worthy man, but simply a soldier, with no head for any greater matter. He cannot make out to see how a country girl, ignorant of war, can take a sword in a small hand and win victories where the trained generals of France have looked for defeats only for 50 years, and always found them. And so he lifts his frosty mustache and scoffs. When God fights, it is but small matter whether the hand that bears his sword is big or little. He will perceive this in time. Is there none in that castle of Chinon who favors us? Yes, the king's mother-in-law, Yolanda, Queen of Sicily, who is wise and good. She spoke with the Sieur Bertrand. She favors us, and she hates those others, the king's beguilers, said Bertrand. She was full of interest, and asked 1,000 questions, all of which I answered according to my ability. Then she sat thinking over these replies, until I thought she was lost in a dream, and would wake no more. But it was not so. At last she said, slowly, and as if she were talking to herself, "A child of 17, a girl, country-bred, untaught, ignorant of war, the use of arms, and the conduct of battles, modest, gentle, shrinking, yet throws away a shepherd's crook and clothes herself in steel, and fights a way through 150 leagues of fear, and comes, she to whom a king must be a dread and awful presence, and will stand up before such an one and say, 'Be not afraid, God has sent me to save you.' Aye, Whence could come a courage and conviction so sublime as this but from very God himself? She was silent again a while, thinking and making up her mind. Then she said, "And whether she comes of God or no, there is that in a heart that raises her above men, high above all men that breathe in France today. For in her is that mysterious something that puts heart into soldiers, and turns mobs of cowards into armies of fighters that forget what fears when they are in that presence. Fighters who go into battle with joy in their eyes and songs on their lips, and sweep over the field like a storm. That is a spirit that can save France, and that alone, come it whence it may. It is in her, I do truly believe. For what else could have borne up that child on that great march, and made her despise its dangers and fatigues? The king must see her face to face, and shall. She dismissed me with those good words, and I know her promise will be kept. They will delay her all they can, those animals, but she will not fail in the end. Would she were king, said the other night, fervently, for there is little hope that the king himself can be stirred out of his lethargy. He is wholly without hope, and is only thinking of throwing away everything and flying to some foreign land. The commissioners say there is a spell upon him that makes him hopeless. Yes, and that it is shut up in a mystery which they cannot fathom." "I know the mystery," said Joan, with quiet confidence. "I know it, and he knows it, but no other but God. When I see him, I will tell him a secret that will drive away his trouble. Then he will hold up his head again." I was miserable with curiosity to know what it was that she would tell him, but she did not say, and I did not expect she would. She was but a child, it is true, but she was not a chatterer to tell great matters and make herself important to little people. No, she was reserved and kept things to herself, as the truly great always do. The next day Queen Yolanda got one victory over the king's keepers, for, in spite of their protestations and obstructions, she procured an audience for our 2 nights, and they made the most they could out of their opportunity. They told the king what a spotless and beautiful character Joan was, and how great and noble a spirit animated her, and they implored him to trust in her, believe in her, and have faith that she was sent to save France. They begged him to consent to see her. He was strongly moved to do this, and promised that he would not drop the matter out of his mind, but would consult with his council about it. This began to look encouraging. 2 hours later there was a great stir below, and the innkeeper came flying up to say a commission of illustrious ecclesiastics was come from the king his very self. Understand, think of this vast honor to his humble little hostelry, and he was so overcome with the glory of it that he could hardly find breath enough in his excited body to put the facts into words. They were come from the king to speak, with the maid of Vaucouleurs. Then he flew downstairs, and presently appeared again, backing into the room, and bowing to the ground with every step, in front of 4 imposing and austere bishops and their train of servants. Joan rose, and we all stood. The bishops took seats, and for a while no word was said, for it was their prerogative to speak first, and they were so astonished to see what a child it was that was making such a noise in the world and degrading personages of their dignity to the base function of ambassadors to her in a plebeian tavern, that they could not find any words to say at first. Then presently their spokesman told Joan they were aware that she had a message for the king, wherefore she was now commanded to put it into words, briefly and without waste of time or embroideries of speech. As for me, I could hardly contain my joy. Our message was to reach the king at last, and there was the same joy and pride and exultation in the faces of our knights, too, and in those of Joan's brothers. And I knew that they were all praying, as I was, that the awe which we felt in the presence of these great dignitaries, and which would have tied our tongues and locked our jaws, would not affect her in a like degree, but that she would be enabled to word a message well, and with little stumbling, and so make a favorable impression here, where it would be so valuable and so important. Ah, day, how little we were expecting what happened then. We were aghast to hear her say what she said. She was standing in a reverent attitude, with her head down and her hands clasped in front of her, for she was always reverent toward the consecrated servants of God. When the spokesman had finished, she raised her head and set her calm eye on those faces, not any more disturbed by their state and grandeur than a princess would have been, and said, with all her ordinary simplicity and modesty of voice and manner, "Ye will forgive me, reverend sirs, but I have no message save for the king's ear alone." Those surprised men were dumb for a moment, and their faces flushed darkly. Then the spokesman said, Hark ye, till you fling the king's command in his face and refuse to deliver this message of yours to his servants appointed to receive it. God has appointed me to receive it, and another's commandment may not take precedence of that. I pray you let me have speech for his grace the Dauphin. Forbear this folly, and come at your message. Deliver it, and waste no more time about it. You are indeed most reverend fathers in God, and it is not well. I am not come hither to talk, but to deliver Orleans, and lead the Dauphin to his good city of Rheims, and set the crown upon his head. Is that the message you send to the king? But Joan only said, in the simple fashion which was her wont, Ye will pardon me for reminding you again, but I have no message to send to anyone. The king's messengers rose in deep anger and swept out of the place without further words, we and Joan kneeling as they passed. Our countenances were vacant, our hearts full of a sense of disaster. Our precious opportunity was thrown away. We could not understand Joan's conduct. She who had been so wise until this fatal hour. At last the Sieur Bertrand found courage to ask her why she had let this great chance to get a message to the king go by. Who sent them here? She asked. The king. Who moved the king to send them? She waited for an answer. None came, for we began to see what was in her mind. So she answered herself, The Dauphin's counsel moved him to it. Are they enemies to me and to the Dauphin's wheel, or are they friends? Enemies, answered the Sieur Bertrand. If one would have a message go sound and ungarbled, does one choose traitors and tricksters to send it by? I saw that we had been fools, and she wise. They saw it too, so none found anything to say. Then she went on. They had but small wit that contrived this trap. They thought to get my message and seemed to deliver it straight, yet deftly twist it from its purpose. You know that one part of my message is but this, to move the Dauphin by argument and reasonings to give me men-at-arms and send me to the siege. If an enemy carried these in the right words, the exact words, and no word missing, yet left out the persuasions of gesture and supplicating tone and beseeching looks that inform the words and make them live, where were the value of that argument? Whom could it convince? Be patient. The Dauphin will hear me presently. Have no fear. The Sieur de Metz nodded his head several times, and muttered as to himself, She was right and wise, and we are but dull fools, when all is said. It was just my thought. I could have said it myself, and indeed it was a thought of all there present. A sort of a crept over us, to think how that untaught girl, taken suddenly and unprepared, was yet able to penetrate the cunning devices of a king's trained advisers and defeat them. Marveling over this, and astonished at it, we fell silent and spoke no more. We had come to know that she was great in courage, fortitude, endurance, patience, conviction, fidelity to all duties, in all things, indeed, that make a good and trusty soldier and perfect him for his post. Now we were beginning to feel that maybe there were greatnesses in a brain that were even greater than these great qualities of the heart. It set us thinking. What Joan did that day bore fruit the very day after. The king was obliged to respect the spirit of a young girl who could hold her own and stand her ground like that, and he asserted himself sufficiently to put his respect into an act instead of into polite and empty words. He moved Joan out of that poor inn, and housed her, with us as servants, in the castle of Courdray, personally confiding her to the care of Madame de Bellier, wife of old Raoul de Gaucourt, master of the palace. Of course, this royal attention had an immediate result. All the great lords and ladies of the court began to flock there to see and listen to the wonderful girl soldier that all the world was talking about, and who had answered the king's mandate with a bland refusal to obey. Joan charmed them every one with her sweetness and simplicity and unconscious eloquence, and all the best and capablest among them recognized that there was an indefinable something about her that testified that she was not made of common clay, that she was built on a grander plan than the mass of mankind, and moved on a loftier plane. These spread her fame. She always made friends and advocates that way. Neither the high nor the low could come within the sound of her voice and the sight of her face and go out from her presence indifferent. Chapter 6. Joan convinces the king. Well, anything to make delay. The king's council advised him against arriving at a decision in our matter too precipitately. He arrived at a decision too precipitately. So they sent a committee of priests, always priests, into Lorraine to inquire into Joan's character and history, a matter which would consume several weeks, of course. You see how fastidious they were. It was as if people should come to put out the fire when a man's house was burning down, and they waited till they could send into another country to find out if he had always kept the Sabbath or not, before letting him try. So the days poked along, dreary for us young people in some ways, but not in all, for we had one great anticipation in front of us. We had never seen a king, and now some day we should have that prodigious spectacle to see and to treasure in our memories all our lives. So we were on the lookout, and always eager and watching for the chance. The others were doomed to wait longer than I, as it turned out. One day great news came. The Orleans commissioners, with Yolanda and our knights, had at last turned the council's position and persuaded the king to see Joan. Joan received the immense news gratefully but without losing her head. But with us others it was otherwise. We could not eat or sleep or do any rational thing for the excitement and the glory of it. During 2 days our pair of noble knights were in distress and trepidation on Joan's account, for the audience was to be at night, and they were afraid that Joan would be so paralyzed by the glare of light from the long files of torches, the solemn pomps and ceremonies, the great concourse of renowned personages, the brilliant costumes, and the other splendors of the court, that she, a simple country maid, and all unused to such things, would be overcome by these terrors and make a piteous failure. No doubt I could have comforted them, but I was not free to speak. Would Joan be disturbed by this cheap spectacle, this tinsel show, with its small king and his butterfly dukelets? She who had spoken face to face with the princes of heaven, the familiars of God, and seen their retinue of angels stretching back into the remoteness of the sky, myriads upon myriads, like a measureless fan of light, a glory like the glory of the sun streaming from each of those innumerable heads. The massed radiance filling the deeps of space with a blinding splendor? I thought not. Queen Yolanda wanted Joan to make the best possible impression upon the king and the court, so she was strenuous to have her clothed in the richest stuffs, wrought upon the princeliest pattern, and set off with jewels. But in that she had to be disappointed, of course, Joan not being persuadable to it, but begging to be simply and sincerely dressed, as became a servant of God, and one sent upon a mission of a serious sort and grave political import. So then the gracious queen imagined and contrived that simple and witching costume which I have described to you so many times, and which I cannot think of even now in my dull age without being moved just as rhythmical and exquisite music moves one. For that was music, that dress, that is what it was, music that one saw with the eyes and felt in the heart. Yes, she was a poem, she was a dream, she was a spirit when she was clothed in that. She kept that raiment always, and wore it several times upon occasions of state, and it is preserved to this day in the treasury of Orleans, with 2 of her swords, and a banner, and other things now sacred because they had belonged to her. At the appointed time the Count of Vendôme, a great lord of the court, came richly clothed, with his train of servants and assistants, to conduct Joan to the king, and the 2 knights and I went with her, being entitled to this privilege by reason of our official positions near her person. When we entered the great audience hall, there all was just as I have already painted it. Here were ranks of guard in shining armor and with polished halberds. 2 sides of the hall were like flower gardens of variety of color and the magnificence of the costumes. Light streamed upon these masses of color from 250 flambeaux. There was a wide free space down the middle of the hall, and at the end of it was a throne royally canopied, and upon it sat a crowned and sceptred figure nobly clothed and blazing with jewels. It is true that Joan had been hindered and put off a good while, but now that she was admitted to an audience at last, she was received with honors granted to only the greatest personages. At the entrance door stood 4 heralds in a row, in splendid tabards, with long slender silver trumpets at their mouths, with square silken banners depending from them embroidered with the arms of France. As Joan and the Count passed by, these trumpets gave forth in unison one long rich note, and as we moved down the hall under the pictured and gilded vaulting, this was repeated at every 50 feet of our progress, 6 times in all. It made our good knights proud and happy, and they held themselves erect and stiffened their stride and looked fine and soldierly. They were not expecting this beautiful and honorable tribute to our little country maid. Joan walked 2 yards behind the Count. We 3 walked 2 yards behind Joan. Our solemn march ended when we were as yet some 8 or 10 steps from the throne. The Count made a deep obeisance, pronounced Joan's name, then bowed again and moved to his place among a group of officials near the throne. I was devouring the crowned personage with all my eyes, and my heart almost stood still with awe. The eyes of all others were fixed upon Joan in a gaze of wonder which was half worship, and which seemed to say, "How sweet, how lovely, how divine!" All lips were parted and motionless, which was a sure sign that those people, who seldom forget themselves, had forgotten themselves now, and were not conscious of anything but the one object they were gazing upon. They had the look of people who are under the enchantment of a vision. Then they presently began to come to life again, rousing themselves out of the spell, and shaking it off as one drives away little by little a clinging drowsiness or intoxication. Now they fixed their attention upon Joan with a strong new interest of another sort. They were full of curiosity to see what she would do, they having a secret and particular reason for this curiosity. So they watched. This is what they saw. She made no obeisance, nor even any slight inclination of her head, but stood looking toward the throne in silence. That was all there was to see at present. I glanced up at de Metz, and was shocked at the paleness of his face. I whispered and said, "What is it? Man, what is it?" His answering whisper was so weak I could hardly catch it. "They have taken advantage of the hint, in a letter, to play a trick upon her. She will lure, and they will laugh at her. That is not the king that sits there." Then I glanced at Joan. She was still gazing steadfastly toward the throne, and I had the curious fancy that even her shoulders and the back of her head expressed bewilderment. Now she turned her head slowly, and her eye wandered along the lines of standing courtiers till it fell upon a young man who was very quietly dressed. Then her face lighted joyously, and she ran and threw herself at his feet, and clasped his knees, exclaiming in that soft melodious voice which was a birthright and was now charged with deep and tender feeling, "God of his grace give you long life, O dear and gentle Dauphin." In his astonishment and exultation, de Metz cried out, "By the shadow of God, it is an amazing thing." Then he mashed all the bones of my hand in his grateful grip, and added, with a proud shake of his menere, "Now, what have these painted infidels to say?" Meantime the young person in the plain clothes was saying to Joan, "Ah, you mistake, my child. I am not the king. There he is," and he pointed to the throne. The knight's face clouded, and he muttered in grief and indignation, "Ah, it is a shame to use her so. But for this lie she had gone through safe. I will go and proclaim to all the house what—" "Stay where you are," whispered I and the Sieur Bertrand in a breath, and made him stop in his place. Joan did not stir from her knees, but still lifted her happy face toward the king, and said, "No, gracious liege, you are he, and none other." De Metz's troubles vanished away, and he said, "Verily, she was not guessing. She knew. Now, how could she know? It is a miracle. I am content, and will meddle no more, for I perceive that she is equal to her occasions, having that in her head that cannot profitably be helped by the vacancy that is in mine." This interruption of his lost me a remark or two of the other talk. However, I caught the king's next question. "But tell me who you are, and what would you?" "I am called Joan the Maid, and am sent to say that the King of Heaven wills that you be crowned and consecrated in your good city of Rheims, and be thereafter lieutenant of the Lord of Heaven, who is King of France. And he willeth also that you set me at my appointed work, and give me men-at-arms." After a slight pause she added, highlighting at the sound of her words, "For then will I raise the siege of Orleans and break the English power." The young monarch's amused face sobered a little when this martial speech fell upon it sicker like a breath blown from embattled camps and fields of war, and his trifling smile presently faded wholly away and disappeared. He was grave now, and thoughtful. After a little he waved his hand lightly, and all the people fell away and left those two by themselves in a vacant space. The knights and I moved to the opposite side of the hall and stood there. We saw Joan rise at a sign, then she and the king talked privately together. All that host had been consumed with curiosity to see what Joan would do. Well, they had seen, and now they were full of astonishment to see that she had really performed that strange miracle according to the promise in her letter, and they were fully as much astonished to find that she was not overcome by the pomps and splendors about her, but was even more tranquil in her ease in holding speech with a monarch than ever they themselves had been, with all their practice and experience. As for our two knights, they were inflated beyond measure with pride in Joan, but nearly dumb, As to speech, then not being able to think out any way to account for her managing to carry herself through this imposing ordeal without ever mistake or an awkwardness of any kind to mar the grace and credit of a great performance. The talk between Joan and the king was long and earnest, and held in low voices. We could not hear, but we had our eyes and could note effects. And presently we in all the house noted one effect which was memorable and striking, and has been set down in memoirs and histories and in testimony at the process of rehabilitation by some who witnessed it. For all knew it was big with meaning, though none knew what that meaning was at that time, of course. For suddenly we saw the king shake off his indolent attitude and straighten up like a man, and at the same time look immeasurably astonished. It was as if Joan had told him something almost too wonderful for belief, and yet of a most uplifting and welcome nature. It was long before we found out the secret of this conversation, but we know it now, and all the world knows it. That part of the talk was like this, as one may read in all histories. The perplexed king asked Joan for a sign. He wanted to believe in her and her mission, and that her voices were supernatural and endowed with knowledge hidden from mortals. But how could he do this unless these voices could prove their claim in some absolutely unassailable way? It was then that Joan said, "I will give you a sign, and you shall no more doubt. There is a secret trouble in your heart which you speak of to none, a doubt which wastes away your courage, and makes you dream of throwing all away and fleeing from your realm. Within this little while you have been praying, in your own breast, that God of his grace would resolve that doubt, even if the doing of it must show you that no kingly right is lodged in you." It was that amazed the king, for it was as she had said. His prayer was the secret of his own breast, and none but God could know about it. So he said, "The sign is sufficient. I know now that these voices are of God. They have said true in this matter. If they have said more, tell it me, I will believe. They have resolved that doubt, and I bring their very words, which are these. Thou art lawful heir to the king thy father, and true heir of France. God has spoken it. Now lift up thy head, and doubt no more, but give me men-at-arms and let me get about my work." Telling him he was of lawful birth was what straightened him up and made a man of him for a moment, removing his doubts upon the head and convincing him of his royal right. And if any could have hanged his hindering and pestiferous counsel and set him free, he would have answered Joan's prayer and set her in the field. But no, those creatures were only checked, not checkmated. They could invent some more delays. We had been made proud by the honors which had so distinguished Joan's entrance into that place. Honors restricted to personages of very high rank and worth, but that pride was as nothing compared with the pride we had in the honor done her upon leaving it. For whereas those first honors were shown only to the great, these last, up to this time, had been shown only to the royal. The king himself led Joan by the hand down the great hall to the door, the glittering multitude standing and making reverence as they passed, and the silver trumpets sounding those rich notes of theirs. Then he dismissed her with gracious words, bending low over her hand and kissing it. Always, from all companies, high or low, she went forth richer in honor and esteem than when she came. And the king did another handsome thing by Joan, for he sent us back to Courdray Castle torchlighted and in state, under escort of his own troop, his guard of honor, the only soldiers he had, and finely equipped and bedizened they were, too, though they hadn't seen the color of their wages since they were children, as a body might say. The wonders which Joan had been performing before the king had been carried all around by this time, so the road was so packed with people who wanted to get a sight of her that we could hardly dig through, and as for talking together, we couldn't, all attempts at talk being drowned in the storm of shoutings and huzzas that broke out all along as we passed, and kept abreast of us like a wave the whole way. Chapter 7 Our Paladin in his glory. We were doomed to suffer tedious waits and delays, and we settled ourselves down to our fate and bore it with a dreary patience, counting the slow hours and the dull days and hoping for a turn when God should please to send it. The Paladin was the only exception. That is to say, he was the only one who was happy and had no heavy times. This was partly owing to the satisfaction he got out of his clothes. He bought them at second hand, a Spanish cavalier's complete suit, wide-brimmed hat with flowing plumes, lace collar and cuffs, faded velvet doublet and trunks, short cloak hung from the shoulder, funnel-top buskins, long rapier, and all that, a graceful and picturesque costume, and the Paladin's great frame was the right place to hang it for effect. He wore it when off duty, And when he swaggered by with one hand resting on the hilt of his rapier and twirling his new mustache with the other, everybody stopped to look and admire. And well they might, for he was a fine and stately contrast to the small French gentleman of the day squeezed into the trivial French costume of the time. He was King Bee of the little village that snuggled under the shelter of the frowning towers and bastions of Courdray Castle, and acknowledged lord of the tap room of the inn. When he opened his mouth he got a hearing. Those simple artisans and peasants listened with deep and wondering interest, for he was a traveller and had seen the world, all of it that lay between Chinon and Domrémy, at any rate, and that was a wide stretch more of it than they might ever hope to see, and he had been in battle, and knew how to paint its shock and struggle, its perils and surprises, with an art that was all his own. He was cock of that walk, hero of that hostelry. He drew custom as honey draws flies. So he was a pet of the innkeeper, and of his wife and daughter, and they were his obliged and willing servants. Most people who have a narrative gift, that great and rare endowment, have with it the defect of telling their choice things over the same way every time, and this injures them and causes them to sound stale and wearisome after several repetitions. But it was not so with the paladin, whose art was of a finer sort. It was more stirring and interesting to hear him tell about a battle the 10th time than it was the first time, because he did not tell it twice the same way, but always made anew. Battle of it and a better one, with more casualties on the enemy's side each time, and more general wreck and disaster all around, and more widows and orphans and suffering in the neighborhood where it happened. He could not tell his battles apart himself, except by their names. And by the time he had told one of them 10 times, it had grown so that there wasn't room enough in France for it any more, but was leaping over the edges. But up to that point, the audience would not allow him to substitute a new battle, knowing that the old ones were the best and sure to improve as long as France could hold them. And so, instead of saying to him as they would have said to another, "Give us something fresh. We are fatigued with that old thing," they would say, with one voice and with a strong interest, "Tell about the surprise at Beaulieu again. Tell it 3 or 4 times." That is a compliment which few narrative experts have heard in their lifetime. At first, when the paladin heard us tell about the glories of the royal audience, he was broken-hearted because he was not taken with us to it. Next, his talk was full of what he would have done if he had been there, and within 2 days he was telling what he did do when he was there. His mill was fairly started, now, and could be trusted to take care of its affair. Within 3 nights afterward, all his battles were taking a rest. For already his worshippers in the tap-room were so infatuated with the great tale of the royal audience that they would have nothing else, and so besotted with it were they that they would have cried if they could not have gotten it. Noel ran guess and hid himself and heard it, and came and told me, and after that we went together to listen, bribing the inn hostess to let us have a little private parlor, where we could stand at the wickets in the door and see and hear. The tap-room was large, yet had a snug and cozy look, with its inviting little tables and chairs scattered irregularly over its red brick floor, and its great fire flaming and crackling in the wide chimney. It was a comfortable place to be in on such chilly and blustering March nights as these, and a goodly company had taken shelter there, and were sipping their wine in contentment and gossiping one with another in a neighborly way while they waited for the historian. The host, the hostess, and their pretty daughter were flying here and there and yonder among the tables and doing their best to keep up with the orders. The room was about 40 feet square, and a space all down the center of it had been kept vacant and reserved for the paladin's needs. At the end of it was a platform 10 or 12 feet wide, with a big chair and a small table on it, and 3 steps leading up to it. Among the wine sippers were many familiar faces: the cobbler, the farrier, the blacksmith, the wheelwright, the armor, the maltster, the weaver, the baker, the miller's man with his dusty coat, and so on, and conscious and important, as a matter of course, was a barber surgeon, for he is that in all villages. As he has to pull everybody's teeth and purge and bleed all the grown people once a month to keep their health sound. He knows everybody, and by constant contact with all sorts of folk becomes a master of etiquette and manners and a conversationalist of large facility. There were plenty of carriers, drovers, and their sort, and journeyman artisans. When the paladin presently came sauntering indolently in, he was received with a cheer, and the barber hustled forward and greeted him with several low and most graceful and courtly bows, also taking his hand and touching his lips to it. Then he called in a loud voice for a stoup of wine for the paladin, And when the host's daughter brought it up on the platform and dropped her courtesy and departed, the barber called after her and told her to add the wine to his score. This won him ejaculations of approval, which pleased him very much and made his little rat eye shine. And such applause is right and proper, for when we do a liberal and gallant thing, it is but natural that we should wish to see notice taken of it. The barber called upon the people to rise and drink the paladin's health, and they did it with alacrity and affectionate heartiness, clashing their metal flagons together with a simultaneous crash, and heightening the effect with a resounding cheer. It was a fine thing to see how that young swashbuckler had made himself so popular in a strange land in so little a while, and without other helps to his advancement than just his tongue and the talent to use it given him by God, a talent which was but one talent in the beginning, but was now become 10 through husbandry and the increment and usufruct that do naturally follow that, and rewarded as by law. The people sat down and began to hammer on the tables with their flagons and call for the king's audience, the king's audience, the king's audience. The paladin stood there in one of his best attitudes, with his plumed great hat tipped over to the left, the folds of his short cloak drooping from his shoulder, and the one hand resting upon the hilt of his rapier and the other lifting his beaker. As the noise died down, he made a stately sort of a bow, which he had picked up somewhere, then fetched his beaker with a sweep to his lips and tilted his head back and drained it to the bottom. The barber jumped for it and set it upon the paladin's table. Then the paladin began to walk up and down his platform with a great deal of dignity and quite at his ease, and as he walked he talked, and every little while stopped and stood facing his house, and so standing continued his talk. We went 3 nights in succession. It was plain that there was a charm about the performance that was apart from the mere interest which attaches to lying. It was presently discoverable that this charm lay in the paladin's sincerity. He was not lying consciously. He believed what he was saying. To him, his initial statements were facts, and whenever he enlarged a statement, the enlargement became a fact too. He put his heart into his extravagant narrative, just as a poet puts his heart into a heroic fiction, and his earnestness to Sam criticism, dissammed it as far as he himself was concerned. Nobody believed his narrative, but all believed that he believed it. He made his enlargements without flourish, without emphasis, and so casually that often one failed to notice that a change had been made. He spoke of the governor of Vaucouleurs, the first night, simply as the governor of Vaucouleurs. He spoke of him the second night as his uncle the governor of Vaucouleurs. The third night he was his father. He did not seem to know that he was making these extraordinary changes. They dropped from his lips in a quite natural and effortless way. By his first night's account, the governor merely attached him to the maid's military escort in a general and unofficial way. The second night, his uncle, the governor, sent him with the maid as lieutenant of her rear guard. The third night, his father, the governor, put the whole command, maid and all, in his special charge. The first night, the governor spoke of him as a youth without name or ancestry, but destined to achieve both. The second night, his uncle, the governor, spoke of him as the latest and worthiest lineal descendant of the chiefest and noblest of the 12 paladins of Charlemagne. The third night, he spoke of him as the lineal descendant of the whole dozen. In 3 nights, he promoted the Count of Vendôme from a fresh acquaintance to a schoolmate and then brother-in-law. At the king's audience, everything grew, in the same way. First, the 4 silver trumpets were 12, then 35, finally 96. And by that time he had thrown in so many drums and cymbals that he had to lengthen the whole from 500 feet to 900 to accommodate them. Under his hand the people present multiplied in the same large way. The first 2 nights he contented himself with merely describing and exaggerating the chief dramatic incident of the audience, but the third night he added illustration to description. He throned the barber in his own high chair to represent the sham king. Then he told how the court watched the maid with intense interest and suppressed merriment, expecting to see her fooled by the deception and get herself swept permanently out of credit by the storm of scornful laughter which would follow. He worked this scene up till he got his house in a burning fever of excitement and anticipation. Then came his climax. Turning to the barber, he said, "But mark you what she did. She gazed steadfastly upon that sham's villain face as I now gaze upon yours, this being her noble and simple attitude, just as I stand now. Then turned she, thus, to me, and stretching her arm out, so, and pointing with her finger, she said, in that firm, calm tone which she was used to use in directing the conduct of a battle, 'Pluck me this false knave from the throne.' I striding forward as I do now, took him by the collar and lifted him out and held him aloft, thus as if he had been but a child. The house rose, shouting, stamping, and banging with their flagons, and went fairly mad over this magnificent exhibition of strength, and there was not the shadow of a laugh anywhere, though the spectacle of the limp but proud barber hanging there, in the air like a puppy held by the scruff of its neck, was a thing that had nothing of solemnity about it. Then I set him down upon his feet, thus, being minded to get him by a better hold, and he him out of the window, but she bid me forbay, so by that error he escaped with his life. But mark you what she did. Then she turned her about and viewed the throne with those eyes of hers, which are the clear shining windows whence her immortal wisdom looketh out upon the world, resolving its falsities and coming at the kernel of truth that is hid within them. And presently they fell upon a young man modestly clothed, and him she proclaimed for what he truly was, saying, I am thy servant, thou art the king. Then all were astonished, and a great shout went up, the whole 6,000 joining in it, so that the walls rocked with the volume and the tumult of it. He made a fine and picturesque thing of the march out from the audience, augmenting the glories of it to the last limit of the impossibilities. Then he took from his finger and held up a brass nut from a bolt head, which the head ostler at the castle had given him that morning, and made his conclusion thus. Then the king dismissed the maid most graciously, as indeed was a desert, and, turning to me, said, Take this signet ring, son of the paladins, and command me with it in your day of need. And look you, said he, touching my temple, preserve this brain, France has use for it, and look well to its casket also, for I foresee that it will be hooped with a ducal coronet one day. I took the ring, and knelt and kissed his hand, saying, Sire, where glory calls, there will I be found, where danger and death are thickest, that is my native air. When France and the throne need help, well, I say nothing, for I am not of the talking sort. Let my deed speak for me, it is all I ask. So ended the most fortunate and memorable episode, so big with future weal for the crown and the nation, and unto God be the thanks. Rise, fill your flagons. Now, to France and the king, drink. They emptied them to the bottom, then burst into cheers and huzzas, and kept it up as much as 2 minutes, the paladin standing at stately ease a while and smiling benignantly from his platform. Chapter 8. Joan persuades her inquisitors. When Joan told the king what that deep secret was that was torturing his heart, his doubts were cleared away. He believed she was sent of God, and if he had been let alone, he would have set her upon her great mission at once. But he was not let alone. Tremouille and the holy fox of Rheims knew their man. All they needed to say was this, and they said it. Your Highness says her voices are revealed to you, by her mouth, a secret known only to yourself and God. How can you know that her voices are not of Satan, and she is mouthpiece? For does not Satan know the secrets of men, and use his knowledge for the destruction of their souls? It is a dangerous business, and your Highness will do well not to proceed in it without probing the matter to the bottom. That was enough. It shriveled up the king's little soul like a raisin, with terrors and apprehensions, and straightway he privately appointed a commission of bishops to visit and question Joan daily until they should find out whether her supernatural helps hail from heaven or from hell. The king's relative, the Duke of Alencon, 3 years prisoner of war to the English, was in these days released from captivity through promise of a great ransom, and the name and fame of the maid having reached him, for the same filled all mouths now, and penetrated to all parts, he came to Chinon to see with his own eyes what manner of creature she might be. The king sent for Joan and introduced her to the Duke. She said, in her simple fashion, You are welcome. The more the blood of France that is joined to this cause, the better for the cause and it. Then the two talked together, and there was just the usual result. When they departed, the Duke was a friend and advocate. Joan attended the king's mass the next day, and afterward dined with the king and the Duke. The king was learning to prize her company and value her conversation, and that might well be, for, like other kings, he was used to getting nothing out of people's talk but guarded phrases, colorless and noncommittal, or carefully tinted to tally with the color of what he said himself. And so this kind of conversation only vexes and bores, and is wearisome. But Joan's talk was fresh and free, sincere and honest, and unmarred by timorous self-watching and constraint. She said the very thing that was in her mind, and said it in a plain, straightforward way. One can believe that to the king this must have been like fresh cold water from the mountains to parched lips used to the water of the sun-baked puddles of the plain. After dinner, Joan so charmed the duke with her horsemanship and lance practice in the meadows by the castle of Chinon, whither the king also had come to look on, that he made her a present of a great black war steed. Every day the commission of bishops came and questioned Joan about her voices and her mission, and then went to the king with their report. These pryings accomplished but little. She told as much as she considered advisable, and kept the rest to herself. Both threats and trickeries were wasted upon her. She did not care for the threats, and the traps caught nothing. She was perfectly frank and childlike about these things. She knew the bishops were sent by the king, that their questions were the king's questions, and that by all law and custom a king's questions must be answered. Yet she told the king in her naive way at his own table one day that she answered only such of those questions as suited her. The bishops finally concluded that they couldn't tell whether Joan was sent by God or not. They were cautious. You see, there were two powerful parties at court. Therefore, to make a decision either way would infallibly embroil them with one of those parties. So it seemed to them wisest to roost on the fence and shift the burden to other shoulders. And that is what they did. They made final report that Joan's case was beyond their powers, and recommended that it be put into the hands of the learned and illustrious doctors of the University of Poitiers. Then they retired from the field, leaving behind them this little item of testimony, wrung from them by Joan's wise reticence. They said she was a gentle and simple little shepherdess, very candid, but not given to talking. It was quite true, in their case. But if they could have looked back and seen her with us in the happy pastures of Domrémy, they would have perceived that she had a tongue that could go fast enough when no harm could come of her words. So we traveled to Poitiers to endure their 3 weeks of tedious delay while this poor child was being daily questioned and badgered before a great bench of, what? Military experts, since what she had come to apply for was an army and the privilege of leading it to battle against the enemies of France. Oh no, it was a great bench of priests and monks, profoundly learned and astute casuists, renowned professors of theology. Instead of setting a military commission to find out if this valorous little soldier could win victories, they set a company of holy hay-splitters and phrase-mongers to work to find out if the soldier was sound in her piety and had no doctrinal leaks. The rats were devouring the house, but instead of examining the cat's teeth and claws, they only concerned themselves to find out if it was a holy cat. If it was a pious cat, a moral cat, all right, never mind about the other capacities. They were of no consequence. Joan was as sweetly self-possessed and tranquil before this grim tribunal, with its robed celebrities, its solemn state and imposing ceremonials, as if she were but a spectator and not herself on trial. She sat there, solitary on a bench, untroubled, and disconcerted the science of the sages with a sublime ignorance, an ignorance which was a fortress, arts, wiles, the learning drawn from books, and all like missiles rebounded from its unconscious masonry and fell to the ground harmless. They could not dislodge the garrison which was within, Joan's serene great heart and spirit, the guards and keepers of her mission. She answered all questions frankly, and she told all the story of her visions and of her experiences with the angels and what they said to her, and the manner of the telling was so unaffected and so earnest and sincere, and made it all seem so lifelike and real, that even that hard practical court forgot itself and sat motionless and mute, listening with a charmed and wondering interest to the end. And if you would have other testimony than mine, look in the histories and you will find where an eyewitness, giving sworn testimony in the rehabilitation process, says that she told that tale with a noble dignity and simplicity, and as to its effect, says in substance what I have said. 17, she was 17, and all alone on a bench by herself, yet was not afraid, but faced that great company of erudite doctors of law and theology, and by the help of no art learned in the schools, but using only the enchantments which were hers by nature, of youth, sincerity, a voice soft and musical, and an eloquence whose source was the heart, not the head, she laid that spell upon them. Now is not that a beautiful thing to see? If I could, I would put it before you just as I saw it. Then I know what you would say. As I have told you, she could not read. One day they harried and pestered her with arguments, reasonings, objections, and other windy and wordy trivialities, gathered out of the works of this and that and the other great theological authority, until at last the patience vanished, and she turned upon them sharply and said, I don't know A from B, but I know this, that I am come by command of the Lord of heaven to deliver Orleans from the English power and crown the King of Rheims, and the matters ye are puttering over are of no consequence. Necessarily those were trying days for her, and wearing for everybody that took part, but her share was the hardest, for she had no holidays, but must be always on hand and stay the long hours through, whereas this, that, and the other inquisitor could absent himself and rest up from his fatigues when he got worn out. And yet she showed no way, no weariness, and but seldom let fly her temper. As a rule, she put her day through calm, alert, patient, fencing with those veteran masters of Scully's swordplay and coming out always without a scratch. One day a Dominican sprung upon her a question which made everybody cock up his ears with interest. As for me, I trembled, and said to myself, she is done this time, poor Joan, for there is no way of answering this. The sly Dominican began in this way, in a sort of indolent fashion, as if the thing he was about was a matter of no moment. You assert that God has willed to deliver France from this English bondage. Yes, he has willed it. You wish for men-at-arms, so that you may go to the relief of Orleans. I believe. Yes, and the sooner the better. God is all-powerful, and able to do whatsoever thing he wills to do. Is it not so? Most surely. None doubts it. The Dominican lifted his head suddenly, and sprung that question I have spoken of, with exultation. Then answer me this. If he has willed to deliver France, and is able to do whatsoever he wills, where is the need for men-at-arms? There was a fine stir and commotion when he said that, and a sudden thrusting forward of heads and putting up of hands to ears to catch the answer, and the Dominican wagged his head with satisfaction, and looked about him collecting his applause, for it shone in every face. But Joan was not disturbed. There was no note of disquiet in her voice when she answered, He helps who help themselves. The sons of France will fight the battles, but he will give the victory. You could see a light of admiration sweep the house from face to face like a ray from the sun. Even the Dominican himself looked pleased to see his masterstroke so neatly parried, and I heard a venerable bishop mutter, in the phrasing common to priests and people in that robust time, By God, the child has said true. He willed that Goliath should be slain, and he sent a child like this to do it. Another day, when the Inquisition had dragged along until everybody looked drowsy and tired but Joan, Brother Seguin, professor of theology at the University of Poitiers, who was a sour and sarcastic man, fell to plying Joan with all sorts of nagging questions in his bastard Limousin French, for he was from Limoges. Finally he said, How is it that you understand those angels? What language did they speak? French. Indeed, how pleasant to know that our language is so honored. Good French. Yes, perfect. Perfect, eh? Well, certainly you ought to know. It was even better than your own, eh? As to that, I believe I cannot say, said she, and was going on, but stopped. Then she added, almost as if she was saying it to herself, Still, it was an improvement on yours. I knew there was a chuckle back of her eyes, for all their innocence. Everybody shouted. Brother Seguin was nettled, and asked brusquely, Do you believe in God? Joan answered with an irritating nonchalance, Oh, well, yes, better than you, it is likely. Brother Seguin lost his patience, and heaped sarcasm after sarcasm upon her, and finally burst out in angry earnest, exclaiming, Very well, I can tell you this, whose belief in God is so great. God has not willed that any shall believe in you without a sign. Where is your sign? Show it. This roused Joan, and she was on her feet in a moment, and flung out her retort with spirit. I have not come to Poitiers to show signs and do miracles. Send me to Orleans, and you shall have signs enough. Give me men-at-arms, few or many, and let me go. The fire was leaping from her eyes. Ah, the heroic little figure. Can't you see her? There was a great burst of acclamations, and she sat down blushing, for it was not in her delicate nature to like being conspicuous. This speech and that episode about the French language scored 2 points against Brother Segan, while he scored nothing against Joan. Yet, sour man as he was a manly man, and honest, as you can see by the histories. For at the rehabilitation, he could have hidden those unlucky incidents if he had chosen, but he didn't do it, but spoke them right out in his evidence. On one of the latter days of that 3-week session, the gowned scholars and professors made one grand assault all along the line, fairly overwhelming Joan with objections and arguments culled from the writings of every ancient and illustrious authority of the Roman Church. She was well nigh smothered, but at last she shook herself free and struck back, crying out, "Listen, the book of God is worth more than all these ye cite, and I stand upon it. And I tell you there are things in that book that not one among ye can read, with all your learning." From the first she was a guest, by invitation, of the Dame de Roberteau, wife of a councillor of the Parliament of Poitiers. And to that house the great ladies of the city came nightly to see Joan and talk with her, and not these only, but the old lawyers, councillors, and scholars of the Parliament and the University. And these grave men, accustomed to weigh every strange and questionable thing, and cautiously consider it, and turn it about this way and that and still doubt it, came night after night, and night after night, falling ever deeper and deeper under the influence of that mysterious something, that spell, that elusive and unwordable fascination, which was the supremest endowment of Joan of Arc, that winning and persuasive and convincing something which high and low alike recognized and felt, but which neither high nor low could explain or describe, and one by one they all surrendered, saying, "This child is sent of God." All day long Joan, in the great court and subject to its rigid rules of procedure, was at a disadvantage. Her judges had things their own way, but at night she held court herself, and matters were reversed, she presiding, with her tongue free and the same judges there before her. There could not be but one result. All the objections and hindrances they could build around her with their hard labors of the day she would charm away at night. In the end, she carried her judges with her in a mess, and got a great verdict without a dissenting voice. The court was a sight to see when the president of it read it from his throne, for all the great people of the town were there who could get admission and find room. First there were some solemn ceremonies, proper and usual at such times. Then, when there was silence again, the reading followed, penetrating the deep hush so that every word was heard in even the remotest parts of the house. It is found, and is hereby declared, that Joan of Arc, called the Maid, is a good Christian and a good Catholic, that there is nothing in her person or her words contrary to the faith, and that the king may and ought to accept the succor she offers, for to repel would be to offend the Holy Spirit, and render him unworthy of the air of God. The court rose, and then the storm of plaudits burst forth unrebuked, dying down and bursting forth again and again, and I lost sight of Joan, for she was swallowed up in a great tide of people who rushed to congratulate her and pour out benedictions upon her and upon the cause of France, now solemnly and irrevocably delivered into her little hands. Chapter 9. She is made General-in-Chief. It was indeed a great day, and a stirring thing to see. She had won. It was a mistake of Domrémy and her other ill wishes to let her hold court those nights. The commission of priests sent to Lorraine ostensibly to inquire into Joan's character, in fact to weary her with delays and wear out her purpose and make her give it up, arrived back and reported her character perfect. Our affairs were in full career now, you see. The verdict made a prodigious stir. Dead France woke suddenly to life, wherever the great news traveled. Whereas before, the spiritless and cowed people hung their heads and slunk away if one mentioned war to them, now they came clamoring to be enlisted under the banner of the Maid of Vaucouleurs, and the roaring of war songs and the thundering of the drums filled all the air. I remembered now what she had said, that time there in our village when I proved by facts and statistics that France's case was hopeless, and nothing could ever rouse the people from their lethargy. They will hear the drums, and they will answer, they will march. It has been said that misfortunes never come one at a time, but in a body. In our case, it was the same with good luck. Having got a start, it came flooding in, tide after tide. Our next wave of it was of this sort. There had been grave doubt among the priests as to whether the church ought to permit a female soldier to dress like a man. But now came a verdict on that head. Two of the greatest scholars and theologians of the time, one of whom had been Chancellor of the University of Paris, rendered it. They decided that since Joan must do the work of a man and a soldier, it is just and legitimate that her apparel should conform to the situation. It was a great point gained, the church's authority to dress as a man. Oh, yes, wave on wave the good luck came sweeping in. Never mind about the smaller waves. Let us come to the largest one of all, the wave that swept us small fry quite off our feet and almost drowned us with joy. The day of the great verdict. Couriers had been dispatched to the king with it, and the next morning bright and early the clear notes of a bugle came floating to us on the crisp air, and we pricked up our ears and began to count them. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3, again, and out we skipped and went flying, for that formula was used only when the king's herald-at-arms would deliver a proclamation to the people. As we hurried along, people came racing out of every street and house and alley, men, women, and children, all flushed, excited, and throwing lacking articles of clothing on as they ran. Still those clear notes pealed out, and still the rush of people increased till the whole town was abroad and streaming along the principal street. At last we reached the square, which was now packed with citizens, and there, high on the pedestal of the great cross, we saw the herald in his brilliant costume, with his servitors about him. The next moment he began his delivery in the powerful voice proper to his office. Know all men, and take heed therefore, that the Most High, the most illustrious Charles, by the grace of God King of France, have been pleased to confer upon his well-beloved servant Joan of Arc, called the Maid, the title, emoluments, authorities, and dignity of General-in-Chief of the armies of France. Here 1,000 caps flew in the air, and the multitude burst into a hurricane of cheers that raged and raged till it seemed as if it would never come to an end. But at last it did. Then the herald went on and finished, and it appointed to be a lieutenant-in-chief of staff a prince of his royal house, his grace the Duke of Alencon. That was the end, and the hurricane began again, and was split up into innumerable strips by the blowers of it, and wafted through all the lanes and streets of the town. General of the armies of France, with a prince of the blood for subordinate. Yesterday she was nothing. Today she was this. Yesterday she was not even a sergeant, not even a corporal, not even a private. Today, with one step, she was at the top. Yesterday she was less than nobody to the newest recruit. Today her command was Lord to La Hire, Saintrels, the Bastard of Orleans, and all those others, veterans of old renown, illustrious masters of the trade of war. These were the thoughts I was thinking. I was trying to realize this strange and wonderful thing that had happened. You see, my mind went traveling back, and presently lighted upon a picture which was still so new and fresh in my memory that it seemed a matter of only yesterday, and indeed its date was no further back than the first days of January. This is what it was. A peasant girl in a far-off village, her 17th year not yet quite completed, and herself in a village as unknown as if they had been on the other side of the globe. She had picked up a friendless wanderer somewhere and brought it home, a small gray kitten in a forlorn and starving condition, and had fed it and comforted it and got its confidence and made it believe in her, and now it was curled up in her lap asleep, and she was knitting a coarse stocking and thinking, dreaming, about what one may never know. And now, the kitten had hardly had time to become a cat, and yet already the girl is general of the armies of France, with a prince of the blood to give orders to, and out of her village obscurity her name has climbed up like the sun and is visible from all corners of the land. It made me dizzy to think of these things. They were so out of the common order, and seemed so impossible.